You guys reported that newly elected Donna Tompkins has inherited some debt from the administration of John Dar that amounts to $13+ million of a deficit. And you depicted that in a way that implies that not only was he battling to try to make ends meet in the sheriff's department to counter an increase in the number of police officers that started to be hired and those reinvestments in that department, it was depicted that there was some fiscal irresponsibility and mismanagement so that it can make it appear that $13 million of money was somehow the fault of John Dar exclusively. Now, I'm not going to tell you I'm a fan of everything John Dar did, because John Dar did a lot of things that he shouldn't have done or that he could have done better. But to suggest that he ended up in that position based upon that form of an audit, which was internal to the benefit of the city, is false. It's misleading. For starters, there was about a $7 million deficit when he came into office. For starters, they said Ralph Johnson's budget was underneath what was allotted to him. Well, how was it underneath it if you're looking at it numerically, then how was there a $7 million deficit if Ralph Johnson did as well in his office as is claimed? So that's misleading from the start. And Ms. Tompkins was there during both of the tenures of both of these sheriffs. If they doubled the amount of work and responsibility for the sheriff's department when they increased police officers and arrests and visits to the court, that would explain how the $7 million that was already part of the deficit would double at the end of his term, because the deficit never went away. He was in battle with the city trying to figure out what to do to get caught up on the deficit that was already there before he came into office. So something about this is disingenuous. And the city and the mayor showed no real collaboration or cooperation and willingness to compromise to figure out something reasonable and realistic to do to resolve these issues. Instead, they spent even more money claiming that they had no fault in the matter and they contributed to that deficit as well by doing nothing. And now it has caught up with them. Now, the reason for this message is not to clarify what I just clarified, because that's obvious. Some people are lying on a lot of levels about the money. What we're saying is that this woman now has a $13 million deficit. That's not going to go away all of a sudden. And what position will she be put in politically to try to offset that deficit? Is she going to have to serve somebody in injustice? Is somebody going to have to die in her jail? Is there going to have to be some type of strategic process? Where are they going to come up with a justification for $13 million that's legitimate with all of the deficiencies in so many other places about money? Not to mention the fact that there are still 2 pending lawsuits dealing with the same issue representing constitutional officers. So something about this is disingenuous. And I know you guys tried to give them a little leeway and help them because they pay into your system for advertising so you can make them look like they're good. But it seems to me that somebody has been misappropriating funds other than Sheriff Dar. That's what the numbers actually indicate. And he was able to be blamed for it. And he had some issues himself where he was unwilling to compromise on certain things. He got out here and built relationships in this community that he shouldn't have been involved in, with personal and private businesses and things like that, incriminating and entrapping people. And he got caught in his own mess is what happened. He had to file that lawsuit because he had been put in a position where he was going to be blamed for all of it as a scapegoat for the city, because all of it fell under their watch. You're not supposed to claim that jurisdiction gives somebody the independent responsibility to override the city's responsibility to do checks and balances on numbers from year to year. All of this happened under the watch of this mayor. They were supposed to audit everybody regardless. They knew there was a deficit going into his tenure. They knew there was a deficit when she came into office. They knew there was a deficit for every year that he served, which they really made no mention of. And so he tried to say that the city was liable for putting him in a position where he could not meet the requirements of his duties based upon the money that they were giving him. And the only reason that the lawsuit went away was because they dragged it out long enough to try to position him so that Donna Tompkins or somebody could assume the role of sheriff and make the issue go away because of a new person that's appointed to the position. The election was tainted. She had been taken off the ballot originally. She appealed, her and some other people. Pam Brown beat all of them initially. This election was tainted, and it needs to be documented. Now, they have a group of people down there that have been working with her husband at the jail. A lot of white guys, and some of them are racist. Let's be upfront about it. Some of them are bigots. Now, I'm not saying that she or her collaborations engage in those kind of mechanisms. I'm not saying that her husband continues to participate in those mechanisms, but I know they have, and I know that even if they don't, they're still associated with those kinds of people down there at that jail. You have a wife and husband who are embedded in the jail that's representing the service for law enforcement for all citizens in this community. And they have to be accountable. They have to be regulated. There have to be checks and balances because they have two streams of flow going into two different directions, which is kind of a conflict of interest, technically speaking, when both parties are working in the same outfit. But they also are going to be under more scrutiny than other people. And it's a unique opportunity for them to take their combined experience and make this community better. If they don't adhere to doing the kinds of things that's going to make this community better, we as a citizen body, we as a body of public officials, we as a body of state representatives have to hold them accountable. They're already coming in on the back burner. Now, Donna Tompkins did not make the mistake of scandalizing John Dar's name, but everybody knows that she's angry. She's angry because John Dar dragged her through the court at taxpayer expense for a claim that she made of discrimination against women when she was in office. This election was rigged, and she gained some retribution by making a comeback through whatever process was at play that gave her enough votes to secure the victory. Now, I'm not trying to out her or get her in trouble, but she needs to be respectful and she needs to be responsible, or that history will haunt her because she didn't come in clean. Now, I don't want to disparage her because she's a woman. I want to show compassion and empathy towards what women who are employees in law enforcement face from day to day when they're trying to figure out how to empower themselves and how to advance in a culture dominated by men. I understand that entirely. But if she's just thinking she's going to come into office and use gender aggression and then exploit her husband and his white race and all of this kind of stuff to make more trouble in Columbus, that's not going to happen. We can do something about that. And this needs to be documented. And we want her to be respectful and representative of everybody and show the sensitivity and compassion as best she can within that kind of a culture that she's trying to make this community better. Not just put people in jail, not just put herself in these little clubs and do the kinds of stuff that John Dar let himself get into. We don't really know her personally in terms of black culture, not actual people. They've never really been invested in building the kind of relationships in Columbus where the public officials really have a real relationship with the people who are most likely going to be in need to be served. They just build secular clubs amongst themselves at public expense. And so what's going to be different? And let's keep in mind that Ralph Johnson was able to slide out of his position after his deputies went out and killed Kenneth Walker, and nobody has been punished for it yet. And they paid off his family so that they could help his daughter when they shot him in the head while several other officers were around him, and the person never had to be taken to justice and to task for it. So Ralph Johnson's tenure wasn't clean either. And if you're going to talk about the issue, we need to talk about the whole thing. None of this has been clean. There are deputies that are still driving around trying to intimidate people in this community. And Donna Tompkins was there through all of it. And so we have some expectations of her as well. If she's just going to take a leadership position to abuse her role, her rank, her position and authority, she's just going to be repeating the wrong side of history. And we need to hold her accountable now. And we don't have anybody in this community who can speak to these issues except me and like me. Because I know the residual consequence of not confronting these issues, and she has to be kept honest and in balance herself. And I don't believe that she has any motivations thus far to get out and make trouble, but I see she's been pairing herself up in these affiliations, some with the mayor, which gives the indication that she could be putting herself into a position where she's biased or she's showing partial favor to one party or gender or another. And she needs to be very careful with that. If you're just going to take these systems and partner up and collaborate with other departments to the adversity of citizens, something is going on. If you're going to have secret meetings and secret government that the public is not abreast of that impacts their quality of life, something is going on. And she needs to be checked and regulated just like everybody else right now before this gets out of control. Because we can already see what the issues are going to be. She is not going to come in and make some sudden change. $13 million is a lot of money when that budget has to be funded by taxpayers. When economics are already distressed, people are unemployed. She's the main person that causes people to end up impoverished and homeless now. Because it all starts a lot of times with people who get put in jail. That's when you first start to destroy their background and their life. And she should be old enough and she should be experienced enough to know that. We've got to move past this culture of treating people indifferently based upon race and their status based upon poverty. They're policing people who really don't have the ability to do anything to be a real threat more aggressively than they are the people who are committing high crime, which is part of the high crime culture in corporations, businesses, banks, and more, and within public government. And if you're not going to police and regulate everyone the same, which is your constitutional responsibility, something is fundamentally wrong. And so all I'm saying is this: John Darr was not a model squeaky clean sheriff. He made a lot of mistakes. When you're voting for somebody in these elections now, it's almost like you have to pick your poison. But what I'm saying is that if you're just going to repeat what was already wrong or make what was already wrong worse, you're not going to get very far. I don't think John Darr effectively served the people of this community. I think he did as best he could with what he knew. I think he did as best he could with what he had at his disposal. But most of his term and tenure was marred by scandal within the department. Some that was pre-existing and some that was under his own watch, including the discrimination case filed by several women against him with now sitting Sheriff Donna Tompkins. And so all parties need to be equally vetted and held accountable and regulated. And I don't think it's fair for the press to depict it as one-sided and solely based upon John Darr, when Ralph Johnson, Donna Tompkins, and John Darr all share some responsibility in where we are right now. Because when she filed that lawsuit, she too contributed to the distress of the economics of taxpayers in defense of her own right to advance and be respected as a woman. And I understand that. But I'm just saying, don't try to make it seem like it's just one person. We need solutions now. We don't need blame. If you're just going to come in trying to blame people, you're going to be doing nothing but what has already occurred. You're just going to be repeating the same part of history. You're just going to start up another cycle of what has already happened. And we need to be mindful of that. God bless.